U.S. national security leaders included me in a group chat about upcoming military strikes. In Yemen. I didn't think it could be real. Then the bombs started falling. The world found out shortly before 2 p.m. Eastern Time on March 15th that the United States was bombing Houthi targets across Yemen. I, however, knew 2 hours before the first bombs exploded that the attack might be coming. The reason I knew this is that Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, had texted me the war plan at 11:44 a.m. The plan included precise information about weapons packages, targets, and timing. The story technically begins shortly after the Hamas invasion of southern Israel in October 2023. The Houthis, an Iran-backed terrorist organization whose motto is "God is great," death to America, death to Israel, curse on the Jews, victory to Islam, soon launched attacks on Israel and on international shipping, creating havoc for global trade. Throughout 2024, the Biden administration was ineffective in countering these Houthi attacks. The incoming Trump administration promised a tougher response. This is where Pete Hegseth and I come in. On Tuesday, March 11th, I received a connection request on Signal from a user identified as Michael Waltz. Signal is an open-source encrypted messaging service popular with journalists and others who seek more privacy than other text messaging services are capable of delivering. I assumed that the Michael Waltz in question was President Donald Trump's national security advisor. I did not assume, however, that the request was from the actual Michael Waltz. I have met him in the past, and though I didn't find it particularly strange that he might be reaching out to me, I did think it's somewhat unusual, given the Trump administration's contentious relationship with journalists and Trump's periodic fixation on me specifically. It immediately crossed my mind that someone could be masquerading as Waltz in order to somehow entrap me. It is not at all uncommon these days for nefarious actors to try to induce journalists to share information that could be used against them. I accepted the connection request, hoping that this was the actual national security advisor and that he wanted to chat about Ukraine or Iran or some other important matter. 2 days later, Thursday, at 4:28 p.m., I received a notice that I was to be included in a Signal chat group. It was called the Houthi PC Small Group. A message to the group, from Michael Waltz, read as follows. Team, establishing a principles-SICA group for coordination on Houthis, particularly for over the next 72 hours. My deputy Alex Wong is pulling together a Tiger team at deputies/agency chief of staff level following up from a meeting in the sit room this morning for action items, and will be sending that out later this evening. The message continued, please provide the best staff POC from your team for us to coordinate with over the next couple days and over the weekend. THX. The term Principals Committee generally refers to a group of the senior-most national security officials, including the Secretaries of Defense, State, and the Treasury, as well as the Director of the CIA. It should go without saying, but I'll say it anyway, that I have never been invited to a White House Principals Committee meeting, and that, in my many years of reporting on national security matters, I had never heard of one being convened over a commercial messaging app. 1 minute later, a person identified only as Mar, the Secretary of State is Marco Antonio Rubio, wrote, Mike Needham for State, apparently designating the current counselor of the State Department as his representative. At that same moment, a Signal user identified as JD Vance wrote, Andy Baker for VP. 1 minute after that, TG, presumably Tulsi Gabbard, the Director of National Intelligence or someone masquerading as her, wrote, Joe Kent for DNI. 9 minutes later, Scott B., apparently Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent, or someone spoofing his identity, wrote, Dan Katz for Treasury. At 4:53 p.m., a user called Pete Hegseth wrote, Dan Caldwell for DOD. And at 6:34 p.m., Brian wrote, Brian McCormick for NSC. One more person responded. John Ratcliffe wrote at 5:24 p.m. with the name of a CIA official to be included in the group. I am not publishing that name because that person is an active intelligence officer. This is going to require some explaining. The principals had apparently assembled. In all, 18 individuals were listed as members of this group, including various National Security Council officials, Steve Witkoff, President Trump's Middle East and Ukraine negotiator, Susie Wiles, the White House Chief of Staff, and someone identified only as SM, which I took to stand for Stephen Miller. I appeared on my own screen only as Jada. That was the end of the Thursday text chain. After receiving the waltz text related to the Houthi PC small group, I consulted a number of colleagues. We discussed the possibility that these texts were part of a disinformation campaign initiated by either a foreign intelligence service or, more likely, a media gadfly organization, the sort of group that attempts to place journalists in embarrassing positions and sometimes succeeds. I had very strong doubts that this text group was real because I could not believe that the national security leadership of the United States would communicate on Signal about imminent war plans. I also could not believe that the national security advisor to the president would be so reckless as to include the editor-in-chief of The Atlantic in such discussions with senior U.S. officials, up to and including the vice president. The next day, things got even stranger. At 8:05 a.m. on Friday, March 14th, Michael Waltz texted the group, "Team, you should have a statement of conclusions with taskings per the president's guidance this morning in your high side inboxes." High side, in government parlance, refers to classified computer and communication systems. State and DoD, we developed suggested notification lists for regional allies and partners. Joint Staff is sending this and a more specific sequence of events in the coming days, and we will work WDoD to ensure COS, OVP, and POTUS are briefed. At this point, a fascinating policy discussion commenced. The account labeled JD Vance responded at 8:16. "Team, I am out for the day doing an economic event in Michigan, but I think we are making a mistake." Vance was indeed in Michigan that day. The Vance account goes on to state, 3% of U.S. trade runs through the Suez. 40% of European trade does. There is a real risk that the public doesn't understand this, or why it's necessary. The strongest reason to do this is, as POTUS said, to send a message.